Hi everyone, welcome back. I wanted to talk a little bit today about interpersonal communications. Taking a next step from where we left off last time and looking at some of the models that are going to come into play as we talk about interpersonal communications. First, we talked a little bit about Shannon's model that you see down here on the left. With the sender, receiver, the noise, the feedback, sort of some of the stuff we talked about last time. What you'll see if you start delving into the communication theory, you'll see a couple other models that have come out that are going to come into play as we think about interpersonal. Scram came out and said that he thought that this Shannon's model was not necessarily people-based as much because he felt that a sender could be a sender and receiver at the same time, where this model doesn't necessarily show it, and that we all have fields of experience that come into effect. So what Scram said was he added a field of experience. So basically, if you put a circle around each of these guys and sort of almost like a Venn diagram without the three, just the two, sort of matching in the middle here. So if I drew a circle here, and then he said there was, that field of experience there, and that those added to the communication model. And then you see Ogden and Richards came back and they said, oh, there's more to it. There's referents that come into play. And I think we talked about this one a little bit, but A and B are the two people, and how we see each other as A and B determines how we see X, our referent. So if I have a good relationship with B, then B is going to have more of a positive belief in what I'm saying about X. But if A and B don't have a good relationship, it sort of takes the symmetry out of that triangle, makes it to where B doesn't necessarily trust what I'm saying about X. So beyond Scram saying the field of experience, there's also this sort of coming back and forth between each other in this sort of symmetry. We also have Wesley and McLean, who took it even a step further and said, wait a minute, we don't necessarily need an A. If you consider B as being yourself here in this model, and A still being that person that you're talking with, they said that communication can come straight from the source. So you seeing a sign is you taking in that information. You could have A seeing the sign and giving you that information. You could also see it yourself, and then you could have a feedback loop to A. He also then took it a step further and said, wait a minute, we don't necessarily need that middleman. There could be C in here. And C could be maybe the government, maybe media, telling you what you should understand or think. And that C could be influenced by the sign. So the media sees a stop sign. Let's say your car sees a stop sign and tells you to stop. And you then interpret it and then react. And then they took it even further and said, well, A could be influencing this media, and then which would influence B. So there's a lot of different models that look at how we understand the way messages come across. But as we think about interpersonal, it's when we really start thinking about this interaction between A and B or B and C and how that plays into it. Your book talks a little bit about rhetoric, and rhetoric becomes really important as we start thinking about influencing, talking with individuals. Classic rhetoric theory really said that people were rational decision makers. We looked for information and we made a rational decision. Okay? And they also said that sometimes we would make a conscious decision with our emotions. So sometimes our emotions will come in. And so they brought in the idea of logo, ethos, and pathos. And logo was sort of the logical power of the message. So if the message was logical and understandable, you're going to make a rational decision from it. Ethos said that if the source, you look at the source as you make this decision. So is the source credible? Do you believe them? Is that going to help you make that decision? And then pathos is that third thing that sort of talks about the emotion of persuasion. And we'll talk a lot about this pathos idea over the semester. Pathos was saying that emotion can be as powerful as logo, as powerful as that logical information, and a lot of times can interfere with your rational decision making. So pathos became really important as the theories in the classical rhetoric theory came into being. As time went on, contemporary rhetoric theory sort of broadened that definition of rhetoric, because traditionally, when we talked about rhetoric and communication theories, they were very much person speech. So that contemporary then took it into the text. And it also, so it was signs and text and media messages. But it also said that there was never a true objectivity when you were making these decisions and understanding. And I think if you think about it, if you go back into the idea of pathos and emotion, that right there shows you that there's no objectivity in anything. So the theory sort of moved forward. I think we see this really well when we look at different media messages in terms of agriculture. This is, if you've seen it, this Chipotle video looking at the scarecrow. And if I'm trying to make a decision logically after seeing this video and whether I believe or disbelieve, if I think about the logo, is it logical? Is it giving me a true understanding of the message? Do I trust the ethos? Do I trust the source? Do I trust Chipotle to tell me how agriculture is done? And then goes into my pathos, my emotional. So I may say, logically, the message doesn't really tell me anything, doesn't really, logically, is that really the way it's done because this is a cartoon? Ethos, source, it's Chipotle. I'm not sure necessarily if they know what traditional farming is. But when I get to my pathos, my emotion, seeing the sad face of the cow, seeing the chicken, and the farmer watching, sadly, maybe that's going to hit me a little more. So as we think about communications, we have to think about, are we making logical statements? Are we credible sources? And then are we emotionally connecting with the consumer or with the other person as we try and influence them? As we think about interpersonal communications, it's really easy to identify issues. It's really hard to identify the communication aspects. So what are people's individual motivations? What are their experiences? What are their beliefs? What are their ethos? What are their pathos? What are their emotional expectations? What is their background that they're bringing into the message? And what's their understanding of the people who are trying to provide the message? So it's really easy for us to talk about issues, but as we think about interpersonal communication and the things that are going to come into play, and I think from talking to a lot of you in terms of working in extension, working in the health field, working in livestock judging, for example, there's a lot when we're trying to put forth a message. We can easily know what the message is, but we have to think about the motivations behind the people we're discussing. And as we, start to understand this helps us. Whether we're resolving a conflict or engaging people to do something, maybe when we want them to do a healthy behavior, you really have to think about how do you communicate an involved topic to a low involvement audience. The Chipotle video, people aren't involved in understanding where their food comes from, so how are they communicating that topic to get them engaged in it? Well, they're using that pathos, that emotion. How do you get people who have a little frame of reference to see your point of view? Again, Chipotle did that very well in, trying to flat out a logical understanding. And then how can differing viewpoints agree? How do we do a message that allows us, when we think about that triangle, that symmetry, how can we disagree on what X is, but A and B still have symmetry and still get along? When we think about characteristics, we have to think about a couple things. First, it's a dyad. We're in a social relationship, and there's a lot that we'll talk about here in a second in terms of social relationships and how that comes into play when we are communicating. We're going to move from this impersonal to this personal to, I don't know who you are, why are you talking to me, to, oh, I understand you. I want to, listen to what you're saying. I want to do what you're telling me to do. But it all begins with who you are, your self-image, your self-concept, how you see yourself, okay? In terms of how credible you see yourself. I had an instructor one time tell me, when I first started teaching, he said, you don't always look like you know what you're talking about. And it's important that you know what you're talking about so they believe you, whether you do or don't. And it goes back to that, my self-image, my self-concept, to know and be confident in the fact that I do know what I'm talking about, so others believe what I'm saying. So who you are. And a lot of that also comes into play in our social order. Where are we in rankings in our profession, our career, our family dynamics, our friend dynamics? Where are you? And then what I think others' self-images of me will come into play. And part of that is our persona, our personality. What are some of our psychological traits? Am I a comical person? Am I a quiet person? Am I a boisterous person? My husband is the exact opposite. Me, he's very boisterous and outgoing, where I'm more pulled in. And so people react with us different and talk with us different because of that. Comes into the locus of control. Are you inner or outer directed? Do you think you have inner locus of control, meaning you have control of the outcomes of your life, or do you think it's outer directed and you think others have the impact and the control? Women tend to feel that their lives are more outer directed, where men tend to be more inner directed. And as you get older, you become more inner directed, knowing that you have more control of your life. And then how your impression management, how others will see you. How do you manage what others see of you and what you give out of yourself? And a lot of this goes to Johari's Window. Some of you may have heard of Johari's Windows before. It was done by Joseph Left and Harry Ingheim. And this is sort of a model that's used in business some to look at how people interact and communicate with each other a lot. If you think about, it describes the process of human interaction through this four-paned window, okay? And it divides personal awareness into this four types. Your open type, which is what I see in me and what you see in me. So it's your public self. It's what you have allowed others to see. You then have sort of your private self, what I see in me and what you do not see in me. So what I don't let you have, okay? So it's what I'm not allowing you to see of myself. So it's maybe my personal life, what I know but I don't want others to know. And then there's sort of this blind self, what I don't see in me but you see in me. And the blind self is something I'm not aware of but you are. So maybe I have a feeling of inadequacy or unworthiness or rejection. I have a colleague that I can see this in them so much. They have a self-esteem issue, and I see it in them, but they don't see it in them. So it's sort of this blind self, okay? And so as I interact, I know of this blind self that this person has. And then there's sort of the unknown self, the stuff that you don't know and I don't know, okay? And our goal in communicating and working with others is to basically open up this open area, okay? We want people to know our behaviors, our knowledge, our skills, our attitudes, sort of our public history, who we are. We want to self-disclose ourselves. Now, there's obviously a limit to self-disclosure where you do always want to have a little bit of your private self involved. However, what you want to do as you move through, you want to, as you get feedback from others, you will find that your open self moves and gets wider this way. So if I told that person that I feel that they've got lower self-esteem and that they shouldn't have self-esteem, they're really good at what they do, their open self sort of expands and that blind self, what they don't understand, shrinks. Maybe as I tell you more about myself, my open self gets bigger. I decrease my private self. And so the most effective, productive, cooperative environment is when we have a large open public self. Okay, we've taken these walls here and pushed them out. You've given me feedback on myself, and I've told you more about myself. And so as this interaction progresses, these lines move, and we have a better understanding of each other, and our ethos is going to increase.